I was staring at the wall when I realized my mother was gone for good. Not just physically, she'd been dead for over a decade, but erased. The family portrait that once hung near the staircase, the one where she's laughing in that soft blue dress, was gone. In its place, a sleek, modern frame with Vanessa's smug face in the center, surrounded by Brandon and Chloe like they were the perfect nuclear family. I wasn't even in it. My breath caught in my throat. It was a small thing. A picture. But it felt like someone had reached inside my chest and quietly snapped the last thread tying me to the life I used to know. That was the moment I knew, they had never planned to keep me. They were just waiting me out. Smiling to my face, cutting me off behind my back. It had always been a countdown. And now, with my 23rd birthday around the corner, their time was up. Let me take you back. My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 23 years old. And for a while, I lived a life most kids would envy. I was the only child of Mark and Elena Hayes. Dad ran a booming logistics company, and Mom stayed home to raise me. I remember warm cookies after school, jazz music playing in the kitchen, and Mom's gentle hum when she braided my hair at night. She made everything feel safe. Certain. Permanent. But nothing is permanent, is it? She died when I was 12. One moment she was sipping tea in the garden, telling me about a trip we might take to Italy, and the next, she collapsed right in front of me. A sudden heart condition, they said. Undiagnosed. Irreversible. She was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Dad was never the same after that. He was already a workaholic, but Mom had been his anchor. Without her, he drifted deeper into boardrooms and late meetings. He loved me, I know that, but he didn't know how to show it anymore. Not without her. For months, our house felt like a ghost town. No more music. No more laughter. Just the mechanical hum of the security system and the clinking of ice in his evening glass of scotch. And then came her. Vanessa. Dad met her at a charity fundraiser for children's hospitals. I remember him coming home looking different that night. His face was flushed, not from alcohol, but something else. Hope, maybe. Loneliness wrapped in a pretty dress. Vanessa had a smile that could melt glass. She was elegant, always put together, like a woman who had memorized the manual on how to make men fall at her feet. She also had 2 kids, Brandon, who was 16 and obsessed with his car and his reflection, and Chloe, 14, with perfect posture and permanently narrowed eyes. They moved in within 6 months. To outsiders, we looked like the poster family. A handsome widower finding love again. A beautiful woman bringing 2 well-mannered kids into the fold. Everyone said how lucky we were to find each other. But luck doesn't sneer at you when no one's looking. Luck doesn't rearrange the furniture and toss your mother's favorite quilt into a donation bin. Luck doesn't whisper snide things about your hair, your voice, your laugh, and then flash a sugary smile the second your father walks into the room. I was 13 when I started feeling like a guest in my own home. Vanessa played the long game. She never exploded. She dripped her disdain like perfume, subtle and cloying. At first, she'd tilt her head and say things like, "Sweetie, maybe you'd feel more confident if you wore clothes that suited your body better." Or, "It's normal for some girls to take a little longer to catch on socially." Brandon and Chloe followed her lead. They didn't outright bully me, not at first. They just made sure I was always the odd one out. Forgot to invite me to movie nights. Whispered inside jokes I didn't get. Made faces behind my back at the dinner table. And my dad? He saw none of it. Vanessa was smart. Around him, she was sunshine. She praised him constantly. Took over managing the house, the calendar, even his company's holiday party. He was so relieved not to be doing it alone anymore that he handed over the reins without question. By the time I was 14, Vanessa had turned our home into a stage, and she was the star. Elena's pictures started vanishing from the walls. Chloe's artwork replaced the framed memories I'd grown up with. The family vacations we once planned never happened again. Instead, there were ski trips I wasn't invited to because it would be too much with school. I stopped complaining. It didn't matter. Every time I tried, Dad looked at me like I was being ungrateful. "Vanessa's doing her best," he'd say. "She's trying to keep us together." But I wasn't part of that us. Not anymore. Still, I stayed quiet. I smiled through it. I was good. I studied hard. I didn't make waves. Because part of me hoped, maybe foolishly, that if I just held on, if I just waited, my dad would see it eventually. But time has a cruel sense of humor. Because just when I thought things couldn't unravel anymore, they did. And the worst day of my life came out of nowhere. It started like any other morning. But by that evening, I was an orphan. And Vanessa? She was in charge. The first time I saw Vanessa, she was wearing a silk dress the color of champagne. I remember that vividly. Not because she was beautiful, though she absolutely was, but because she looked so out of place in our house, like someone had stepped off a magazine cover and wandered into my grief. It had been just under a year since Mom died. I was 13, still flinching when people said her name out loud. Our home had grown quieter with each passing month. Dad was either at the office or locked in his study with a glass of something amber and strong. Meals were takeout boxes on paper plates. My mother's garden had withered, and no one played music anymore. So when he called me downstairs one Saturday afternoon and I found Vanessa in the living room, her legs crossed perfectly, her heels tucked just so under the coffee table, I froze. She smiled like I was a client. "You must be Rachel," she said. Her voice was smooth and practiced. "Your father talks about you all the time." That was a lie. Dad barely spoke at all lately, let alone about me. I managed a polite hi and stood there, waiting for someone to explain why this woman, this stranger, was sitting on my mom's favorite chair, the one with the embroidered cushion and faded armrests. Dad introduced her like she was a friend, but his body language told a different story. He stood straighter, almost nervous, and kept glancing at her like she was something delicate that might break if left unattended. They'd met at a charity event, he said. She worked in PR for a nonprofit. She had 2 kids, Brandon and Chloe, and had also been through some things. That's how he put it. Vague, like Vanessa was part of some exclusive club for broken people who smiled through it. I remember nodding slowly while my stomach turned. Something felt off, even then. Maybe it was how quickly she shifted her attention from me to Dad, like my presence was a formality. Or how she scanned the room, eyeing the furniture like she was already imagining how she'd redecorate. Still, I wanted to believe she might be nice. I wanted to believe my father had found someone who could bring light back into the house. But even as a kid, I knew what it felt like to be studied and dismissed. Vanessa didn't see me as a person. I was a variable. A problem to manage. A week later, she came over again. This time, she brought Chloe with her. Chloe was polite in the way kids are when they've been rehearsed. She shook my hand like we were on a job interview and complimented my shirt, which I realized later was actually a subtle dig. "It's so cool that you don't care about trends," she'd said. Then smiled like it was a compliment. Brandon didn't show up until the 3rd visit. He barely looked at me. Just grunted and went off to play video games in our den like he owned the place. When I told Dad, he shrugged. "He's a teenager," he said. "Give him time." I gave them time. Weeks passed. Then months. And slowly, without anyone saying it directly, they started settling in. They'd come over for dinners. Then weekends. Brandon took over the den. Chloe brought art supplies that began cluttering the dining room. Vanessa began rearranging things, just little changes at first. A new fruit bowl. Different candles. Throw pillows that clashed with Mom's. One morning, I came downstairs and saw that the piano, my mother's piano, had been pushed into the corner to make room for some modern coffee table Vanessa had brought over. No one had asked me. When I pointed it out, Dad just said, "Vanessa thought it would open up the space." I began to understand something very clearly: my opinion no longer mattered. And yet, when Vanessa was around Dad, she was sugar-sweet. She'd laugh at his bad jokes, compliment his suits. She'd tell him he was doing an amazing job, keeping everything together, after Elena's passing. It worked. He lit up when she was around. He started shaving more regularly. Stopped drinking quite as much. I think he mistook her attention for healing. Or maybe he just needed someone to pretend things were okay. So when he announced they were getting married, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded, said congratulations, and walked back upstairs, where I cried alone, quietly, so no one would tell me I was being selfish. They married in the spring. It was a small ceremony, rushed, really, held at a country club I'd never been to before. Vanessa wore ivory, not white, and Chloe was her junior bridesmaid. Brandon stood next to my dad like a groomsman. I sat alone in the third row, sandwiched between two women I didn't know, who kept whispering about how stunning the bride was. After the ceremony, Vanessa came over and kissed my cheek. "We're a family now," she said. I smiled for the cameras. But deep inside, something told me, no. "You're a guest in mine." At first, I thought I was imagining it. A missing photo frame in the hallway, a small trinket gone from the living room shelf. Grief had already blurred so much of my memory that it was easy to assume I'd simply misplaced things. But over time, it became undeniable. Vanessa was quietly removing traces of my mother. The first piece I noticed gone was my mom's cookbook, the one stained with butter marks, with notes scribbled in the margins about which recipes worked best and which ones I loved most. I had gone to the kitchen one Sunday morning to make blueberry muffins, the kind Mom always baked to cheer me up, and the book was missing. When I asked Vanessa, she barely glanced up from her tablet. "Oh, that old thing? It was falling apart," she said breezily. I boxed it up with some other clutter when I reorganized the kitchen. The word clutter stung. I eventually found the box buried in the garage, underneath seasonal decorations. The cookbook spine was bent and several pages were torn. Next to it sat my mother's chipped coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" painted in fading red letters, and a photo of her holding me as a toddler, both of us laughing with dirt on our faces after planting in the garden. I sat on the concrete floor staring at that box for what felt like hours. It was as though my mother's life had been demoted to storage, her presence hidden away like something shameful. I didn't bring the box inside. I didn't even tell my dad. I already knew what he would say: Vanessa was only trying to help. But I understood something else entirely. Help doesn't mean stripping a house of its memories. Soon, other things disappeared. The soft pastel painting my mom had brought home from a street artist in Santa Fe was replaced by a cold geometric print that looked mass-produced. The shelves once filled with her novels were rearranged into displays of neutral-colored decor and glossy coffee table books no one ever opened. Vanessa called it modernizing the house, but to me it felt like a deliberate attempt to overwrite the home I had known. Brandon and Chloe adjusted without hesitation. Chloe proudly referred to the redecorated living room as our new space, as though she had grown up there all her life. Brandon claimed my father's study as his personal lounge, filling it with LED lights and energy drinks. Even my own room became a target. My laundry would show up in Chloe's basket, my towels were swapped without explanation, and one day I walked in to find an interior decorator spreading fabric samples across my bed. "We're thinking of updating your room," Vanessa explained with a smile. "Something more sophisticated, since you've outgrown this childish style." I hadn't asked for a redesign. I hadn't asked for any of it. But whenever I tried to speak up, my father shut me down gently, insisting that Vanessa was only trying to make me feel included. To him, every change was a gesture of care. To me, it felt more like being absorbed into someone else's idea of family, until there was no trace left of my own. It wasn't just the house that changed. My mother's birthday slipped by without mention. The hydrangeas she used to plant every spring went unwatered and withered away. The framed photo of her I begged to keep in the hallway was quietly moved upstairs to a dim corner where hardly anyone passed. I wanted my dad to notice, to understand how suffocating it felt, but he was too tired and too grateful to question anything. His work consumed him, and Vanessa eagerly stepped in to manage the rest, the house, his calendar, even details of his business. To him, she was the solution to everything that had been falling apart since Mom died. To me, she was steadily dismantling what little of Mom I had left. And then came the comments, subtle enough that no one else caught them, sharp enough that I could never forget them. If your mother had taught you better posture, you wouldn't slouch so much. Chloe's math scores are remarkable, but I'm sure you're trying your best. Always said with a kind smile, as though she were helping. I tried to brush it off, told myself maybe I was too sensitive, maybe grief was clouding my judgment. But then came the day I found my parents' wedding photo in the trash. The picture of my mom and dad on the dock at Lake Michigan, holding hands, smiling into the future, gone. And in its place on my father's desk stood a glossy photo of him and Vanessa at a gala, her hand pressed against his chest, her smile confident and victorious. That was the moment I stopped questioning my instincts. Vanessa wasn't decorating or updating. She was rewriting the story of our family, piece by piece, until it was hers instead of mine. The night my father died, the world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a phone call. I remember the ring because it cut through the house like an alarm bell, sharp and shrill. I was 16, curled up on my bed with my math homework spread out in front of me. The phone rang once, then again, and by the third ring, I knew something was wrong. No one ever called our landline that late. Vanessa answered in the hallway. Her voice, usually so smooth and deliberate, cracked on the second word. She covered her mouth with one hand and said nothing for a long moment. I stepped out of my room and saw her frozen, clutching the receiver. Brandon and Chloe appeared too, both of them pale, waiting. When she finally spoke, her tone was flat, almost rehearsed. There's been an accident. My legs buckled, though I didn't understand the details yet. Some part of me already knew. Dad was driving home from a business dinner. Wet roads. A truck that didn't stop in time. By the time they pulled him from the wreck, it was too late. I stood in the hallway, unable to breathe, as Vanessa hung up the phone. She turned to us with red-rimmed eyes. She reached for Chloe first, then Brandon, holding them tightly as if they were the only ones who mattered. When her gaze finally landed on me, her expression shifted. Pity. Nothing more. She opened one arm as though to invite me into the embrace, but I stayed frozen where I was. Grief is strange. When my mother died, I screamed until my voice gave out. But when my father died, I went silent. It was as if my body refused to let me make a sound, afraid that if I said the words out loud, they would become permanent. The days that followed were a blur. Vanessa moved with precision, taking control of every detail. She arranged the funeral, contacted the press, handled phone calls with relatives. Whenever people arrived at the house to offer condolences, she met them at the door, dressed in elegant black, Chloe at her side like a shadow. To outsiders, they looked like the picture of a grieving family. I sat in the corner, ignored. A few people noticed, whispering that I looked lost, but most of them gravitated toward Vanessa, praising her strength, her composure. The narrative was already shifting, and I was slipping further into the background. At the funeral, I barely recognized my own father's service. Vanessa had picked out the readings, the music, even the photographs displayed near the casket. Most of them featured her, Brandon, and Chloe alongside Dad at charity events or vacations from the past 2 years. There were almost no traces of my mother, no acknowledgement of the family we had been before Vanessa arrived. I stood in the back row, clutching a crumpled tissue in my hand, and felt like a stranger at my own father's farewell. But the final blow came a week later, in the office of my father's lawyer. The will. Vanessa arrived with Brandon and Chloe dressed sharply, as though they were attending a business meeting. I sat quietly, my heart pounding, praying for some assurance that my father hadn't forgotten me. The lawyer read the document carefully. And for a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. My father had named me the sole heir. The estate, the trust, the assets, all of it would eventually be mine. He hadn't erased me after all. But then came the detail that changed everything. Because I was still a minor, the trust would be controlled by a trustee until I turned 23. And that trustee was Vanessa. I felt the blood drain from my face. She glanced at me across the table, her expression unreadable, though her eyes gleamed with something I recognized all too well, satisfaction. From that moment, she had all the power. Within days, she began acting as if the estate was hers to command. She moved into my father's study, rearranged his files, and started signing papers with his pen. She gave Brandon the largest bedroom in the house, set Chloe up with a private art studio, and relegated me to a smaller, dimmer room at the end of the hall. Whenever I tried to object, she reminded me that she was now responsible for the household and the finances. She used the word responsible often, as if repeating it enough would disguise the truth. She was in charge, and I had no say. Brandon got a new car within weeks. Chloe enrolled in expensive summer art programs. All paid for from the trust. My trust. Meanwhile, I was told to be grateful that my tuition and basic needs were covered. I didn't have the language for it then, but I understood on a gut level. I had been pushed out of my own life. My father's death hadn't just broken my heart. It had handed me over to someone who was determined to strip away everything I had left. And the worst part? The law had given her permission. The week after the will was read, Vanessa gathered us at the dining table for what she called a household meeting. She had printed an agenda, stapled it neatly, and slid copies across the polished wood as though we were a corporate board. Her perfume smelled sharp, like citrus mixed with something metallic, and I felt small in the chair where my mom once sat during pancake breakfasts. "First order of business," she said, tapping the paper with a manicured finger, "room assignments." Brandon perked up immediately, already guessing what was coming. Chloe wore that satisfied smile she got when she knew something before the rest of us. "The primary suite will go to Brandon," Vanessa announced, her eyes flicking to me for a split second as if daring me to object. "Chloe will take the larger guest room for her art studio. Rachel, your belongings are already being packed so we can move you into the back bedroom. It's smaller, but cozier. More age-appropriate." The word age-appropriate clung to me like something sour. By Saturday, movers were hauling my things through the hallway in cardboard boxes. Each one carried the same neat scrawl in black marker: books, Rachel; linens, Rachel; miscellaneous, Rachel. I watched my life get reduced to labels. The new room smelled faintly of dust and cedar, its single window facing the driveway where Brandon stood bragging about his car to his friends. I touched the wall above my new bed and felt the roughness of paint that had been slapped on quickly, more for appearance than comfort. The next agenda item was money. Vanessa framed it as responsibility. She drew a box on her legal pad and wrote the words monthly stipend in tidy block letters. "This will cover toiletries, clothing, and personal extras," she explained, her voice calm and professional. "Tuition, textbooks, and household expenses will, of course, be handled." I knew what that meant. Every purchase would now pass through her. If I needed sneakers, I'd have to ask. If I wanted a haircut, I'd have to justify it. The first time it hit me, I was standing at the campus bookstore trying to buy a chemistry lab manual. My card flashed red at the register. The cashier asked me to try another form of payment, and my ears burned. I called Vanessa outside, crouching near a planter to block the wind. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. "It's not a mistake," she replied, cheerful as ever. "You went over your stipend on toiletries this month. You'll just have to wait." I walked into lab empty-handed, borrowing notes from a classmate, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Meanwhile, Brandon's brand new car appeared in the driveway, delivered with a bow like it was Christmas morning. Vanessa recorded a video of him revving the engine, calling it safe transportation for college. Chloe's turn came soon after, with Vanessa circling tuition numbers on glossy art school brochures, saying, "Consider this an investment." Every expense for them was justified, even celebrated. For me, even necessities felt like obstacles. Quietly, I started keeping notes in a spiral notebook. Dates, purchases, little remarks that stung. The time my card was declined. The week Chloe's New York art program was approved without question. The day Vanessa signed off on Brandon's car insurance with my trust listed as the payer. I didn't have proof of anything illegal, but I wanted some record, even if it was only for myself. The house itself kept changing too. My mom's piano was pushed into storage, the black trail of its casters left behind on the wood like a scar. The hydrangeas she had planted in the garden were ripped out and replaced with shrubs that read well from the curb. Inside, the walls filled with framed photos of Vanessa at galas, Vanessa with Dad at dinners, Vanessa with her kids. The family I grew up in no longer existed in those rooms. When senior year came around, I asked about visiting colleges out of state. Vanessa handed me a list of in-state schools, each one highlighted for practicality. "Your father would have wanted you to be realistic," she said. I didn't argue, but I applied for every scholarship I could find. One weekend, I flew out on my own dime to visit a campus across the country, rain falling over red brick and ivy. I felt alive walking there, like the world might still have room for me. When I won a merit package, Vanessa congratulated me warmly, but each semester became a battle of delays and extra paperwork. Every payment went through her, and she made sure I knew it. So I built my own escape hatch. I worked weekends at a bakery and stuffed cash into an envelope taped beneath my dorm desk. The bills smelled faintly of yeast and sugar, crinkled from being handled too often. It wasn't much, but it was mine, untouchable. One December night, I came home to find Vanessa at the kitchen island, glasses perched on her nose, spreadsheets glowing on her laptop. She called me over, asked for my spring expenses. For a moment, watching her smooth efficiency, I understood why so many people believed in her. She could make manipulation look like care. "It's extraordinary how much it takes to keep a family afloat," she murmured, almost to herself. Family. That word cut deeper than any of the spreadsheets. I smiled, careful, and said I'd send her the itemized list. "Good girl," she said, already moving on to an email. Later, back in my room, I slid the envelope of bakery money out from under my desk and counted it again. Not enough to change my life, but enough to remind me I hadn't been erased completely. I pressed my palm against the gritty edge of tape, a tiny reassurance that some piece of me was still under my own control. By the time I turned 20, I had grown used to moving through holidays like a ghost. Thanksgiving dinners were staged for Vanessa's friends, complete with centerpieces and catered dishes she pretended to make herself. Christmas mornings were photo opportunities, Brandon holding keys to some new gadget, Chloe unwrapping canvases taller than me. I smiled in the background when a camera pointed my way, but mostly I felt like a placeholder. I kept reminding myself I only had to survive until 23. 3 more years, and the trust would finally shift into my hands. I thought I could grit my teeth and wait it out. What I didn't realize was that Vanessa had no intention of leaving me with anything worth inheriting. The first crack showed one winter break when I came home from college. I dropped my suitcase in the hallway and went looking for a quiet corner to read, only to realize the house didn't have one anymore. Every space felt curated, polished, staged. Even my old room, now technically mine again during visits, was redecorated with beige walls and abstract prints that looked rented. That evening, I wandered downstairs for a glass of water. The kitchen lights were dimmed, but voices carried from the den. I recognized Vanessa's tone first, low and measured. Brandon was with her, his deeper laugh cutting through. I froze at the doorway, hidden in the shadows, my heart pounding in my throat. "The trust has been the only reason we've managed," Vanessa said, her voice calm in that way she used when she thought she was being wise. "Your tuition, Chloe's programs, the business investments, it all comes from there." Brandon muttered something I couldn't catch, and then he laughed again. "By the time Rachel turns 23, Vanessa continued, it will be too late for her to do anything about it. The money will be gone, already put to use." The words slid into me like ice. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, trying not to breathe too loud. My body wanted to run, but my ears wouldn't let me. I had to hear everything. She doesn't even notice, Vanessa added, a soft chuckle at the edge of her words. Always too busy with school and her little jobs. Let her think she's surviving on her own. It keeps her compliant. Brandon agreed easily, and for a moment I hated him more than I ever thought possible. Not just for benefiting, but for enjoying it. I crept back up the stairs, every step heavy, careful not to creak the floorboards. In my room, I shut the door and leaned against it, my chest heaving. The trust wasn't just being used unfairly, it was being drained, intentionally, with the expectation that I'd have nothing left by the time it was mine. For years, I had told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was paranoid, that Vanessa's control was smothering but not malicious. That night ended all my doubts. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the beige walls, and felt an anger rising that was stronger than grief, stronger than fear. It wasn't a burst of rage but a steady, burning current, like coals that refused to cool. They thought they were clever. They thought I was powerless. Maybe I had been, once. But power is a strange thing. It can be built in silence, in notebooks filled with details, in envelopes of hidden money, in memories of everything taken. For the first time in years, I didn't just want to wait until 23. I wanted to fight. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know who would believe me. But I knew one thing clearly, Vanessa wasn't protecting my father's legacy. She was dismantling it. And she was certain I was too weak to stop her. That certainty would be her mistake. The weeks after I overheard Vanessa and Brandon were some of the loneliest of my life. I went back to campus, threw myself into classes, and worked extra shifts at the cafe near the library. It was easier to stay busy than to sit still and think about what I had heard. Still, every night when I lay down, the words echoed in my head, by the time Rachel turns 23, it will be too late. That thought made even ordinary things feel heavy. Picking up a textbook, clocking in at the cafe, walking across campus, I carried the knowledge that my future was being quietly dismantled while I pretended to move forward. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was refilling the pastry case at work when I heard someone say my name. A voice I hadn't heard in years, warm and careful, the way you talk when you're checking on someone you love. Rachel? Is that really you? I turned, and there she was, Julia. My mother's closest friend, the woman who used to sit at our kitchen table with her shoes kicked off, laughing with Mom until their eyes watered. She looked older now, of course, with a few silver strands in her hair, but her presence felt exactly the same, steady, familiar, safe. I froze with a croissant in my hand, not sure if I should smile or cry. Julia? She crossed the cafe in 3 quick steps and wrapped me in a hug that smelled faintly of lavender and rain. For the first time in years, I let myself sink into someone's arms. We sat down at a corner table, and she ordered tea. Her eyes kept scanning me like she was searching for something beneath the surface. I haven't seen you since your mother's memorial, she said softly. How are you holding up, sweetheart? I wanted to answer politely. I wanted to say I was fine, that college was going well, that everything was manageable. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just shook my head. Julia reached across the table and touched my hand. You look exhausted. Tell me the truth. Maybe it was the way she asked. Maybe it was the fact that she had known my mother better than anyone. Or maybe I was simply too tired of holding everything in. Whatever the reason, the walls I had been building cracked right there in the middle of the cafe. I told her everything. Not all at once, not in neat sentences, but in a rush that tumbled out between sips of water and shaky breaths. I told her about Vanessa taking over the house, about the stipend, about Brandon's car and Chloe's art programs. I told her about the will, the trust, the endless delays with my tuition payments. And finally, with my voice barely above a whisper, I told her what I had overheard, the plan to drain the trust before I turned 23. Julia listened without interrupting, her brow furrowing deeper with every word. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and let out a slow breath. "Rachel," she said firmly, "this isn't just unfair. This is theft." Hearing her call it what it was sent a shiver through me. I had been too afraid to use that word myself, too afraid it would make everything real. "I don't have proof," I whispered. "She's careful. She knows how to make it look legitimate." Julia's eyes sharpened in a way I recognized from my childhood. She wasn't just my mother's friend. She was a lawyer. And not just any lawyer, one who had built her career on uncovering financial misconduct. "You don't need to fight this alone," she said. Her voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "Your mother was my closest friend. I promised her I would always look out for you, and I intend to keep that promise. If Vanessa has been abusing her role as trustee, there are ways to prove it. And once we have the evidence, we'll take her to court." I blinked at her, barely able to process what she was offering. For years, I had felt like no one believed me, like I was screaming underwater. And here was Julia, looking at me with absolute certainty, telling me that I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't powerless. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I swallowed them back. "Do you really think we can win?" Julia reached across the table again, squeezing my hand with quiet strength. "I don't think, Rachel. I know." For the first time in a long time, I felt something stronger than anger or fear. I felt hope, small and fragile, but alive. After that meeting in the cafe, Julia didn't waste time. She gave me her number and told me to call anytime, day or night. "We're going to do this step by step," she promised, and for the first time in years, I believed someone could actually help. She started by asking for anything I had: documents, emails, bank statements, even scraps of evidence that might show how Vanessa was handling the trust. I dug out my spiral notebooks filled with dates and notes, the ones I had been scribbling in like a diary. I gave her copies of my tuition payment delays, the times my card had been declined, even photos I had taken of Brandon's car in the driveway and Chloe's glossy brochures. They felt small compared to the weight of Vanessa's control, but Julia studied each page with the focus of someone piecing together a puzzle. "Details matter," she said, flipping through the notebook. "You've been keeping better records than you realize. This will help us establish a pattern." From there, Julia pulled the official documents. As my late mother's friend, she still had connections to Dad's old law firm. Within a week, she managed to get copies of the trust's public filings and annual reports. On the surface, they looked clean, carefully balanced, every number accounted for. But Julia had spent her career reading between lines. "Look here," she said one evening, spreading papers across her office desk. "See these transfers? Perfectly legal on paper, but notice how they're all labeled as educational expenses or business investments. That's where we'll find the misuse." We spent hours going through records, sometimes late into the night, her desk lamp casting long shadows across the pages. Julia explained how trustees were allowed to allocate funds for household and educational needs, but only in proportion to the beneficiary, in this case, me. Brandon's car, Chloe's art intensives, even the business loans Vanessa had funneled into her failing ventures had nothing to do with me. They were siphons disguised as care. Each time Julia uncovered another inconsistency, my stomach tightened. Every dollar stolen wasn't just money. It was another piece of my father's legacy, another promise he thought he was leaving to me, another way Vanessa had rewritten the truth. Julia didn't let me spiral. "This isn't about despair, Rachel. It's about evidence. And we're collecting plenty." I started to see her as a kind of shield, someone who stood in the line of fire so I didn't have to. But she also pushed me to be braver. She made me practice how I would testify if it came to that, asking me to describe in detail the years of control, the stipends, the way Vanessa had made me feel invisible in my own home. At first, I stumbled, my voice shaking, my sentences collapsing halfway through. But Julia never looked disappointed. She would just nod and say, "Again." This time, slower. Stronger. Bit by bit, I found my footing. Meanwhile, Vanessa seemed unaware that a storm was building. She continued sending me delayed payments for tuition, her emails full of condescending lines like, "Remember, responsibility is a skill worth learning," and "You'll thank me later for teaching you discipline." Each message only added fuel to the case Julia was constructing. One night, Julia leaned back in her chair and tapped a stack of highlighted papers. "Rachel, this isn't just carelessness. This is fraud. She's been using your inheritance as her personal bank account. And once we file, the court will see it too." The word fraud rang in my ears, sharp and undeniable. It was the word I had been afraid to claim for years, the word that made everything real. I left her office that night with a new kind of energy humming through me. For the first time since Dad died, I wasn't just surviving under Vanessa's shadow. I was preparing to push back. Walking across campus, the air cold enough to sting my cheeks, I imagined the look on Vanessa's face when she realized she was no longer untouchable. For years, she had treated me like an afterthought, a burden she tolerated only because the law required her to. Soon, she would have to face me not as the quiet girl in the back bedroom, but as the rightful heir of the life she had tried to erase. And she would face Julia too, the woman she had never counted on, the ally who had stepped into my corner at exactly the right time. The case wasn't ready yet, but the foundation had been laid. Each note, each record, each stolen dollar traced back to her hands. The cracks in her mask were spreading, and soon enough, everyone would see through. The day the lawsuit was filed, I sat at my dorm desk staring at the email Julia had sent me, petition to remove trustee and recover misappropriated funds. Even seeing the words in print felt unreal. For so long, Vanessa's control had seemed like a wall I could never climb. Now that wall had a crack wide enough to slip through. When the court date was set, Julia prepared me relentlessly. We met in her office week after week, stacks of files spread across the desk. She taught me how to answer questions without flinching, how to hold eye contact even when I felt small, how to speak about my own life with clarity instead of apology. Each practice session left me wrung out, but also stronger. The morning of the hearing, I wore a simple navy dress Julia had helped me choose. "Professional, not flashy," she'd said. My hands trembled as I held the folder she'd given me, but Julia caught my eye as we walked through the courthouse doors. "You've lived this, Rachel. No one knows the truth better than you. All you need to do is tell it." Vanessa arrived with her lawyer, dressed in pale gray and pearls, her expression composed, almost bored. Brandon and Chloe followed, looking polished and detached, as if they were attending one of her galas. She didn't glance at me as she took her seat, but I could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on the room. When the proceedings began, Julia stood with calm authority. She laid out the case piece by piece, the unexplained transfers marked as educational expenses for children who weren't beneficiaries, the business loans that drained the account, the luxury purchases disguised as necessities. She held up my notes, my declined payment records, the endless delays with tuition. Each exhibit stacked higher and higher until the pattern could no longer be ignored. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand with my heart hammering against my ribs. The oath felt heavy in my mouth, but once I sat down, something inside me steadied. Julia's questions came first. She asked about my mother, about the years after she passed, about how the house changed once Vanessa moved in. I told the court about the missing photographs, the new room assignments, the monthly stipends that felt like shackles. My voice shook when I spoke about the night I overheard Vanessa and Brandon, but I forced myself to keep going. Every word was another stone laid in the foundation of truth. Then Vanessa's lawyer stood. His tone was polite, but the questions were designed to rattle me. He asked whether I was exaggerating, whether I misunderstood Vanessa's intentions, whether I was simply resentful of a stepmother who tried to instill discipline. At first, my throat tightened. Then I remembered Julia's advice: don't defend who you are. Defend what happened. So I did. I explained how my tuition payments were delayed until I had to beg professors to let me back into class. I described the way Brandon's car was delivered with a bow, funded by money meant for me. I told them how Chloe's programs were approved instantly while I was made to feel guilty for every request. And I repeated Vanessa's own words: by the time Rachel turns 23, it will be too late. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as if weighing the words more carefully than the rest. When Vanessa finally took the stand, her mask began to slip. She spoke about sacrifice, about keeping the family afloat, about guiding me with tough love. But under Julia's cross-examination, her calm faltered. Questions about specific transfers made her stumble. A line of emails she had thought buried showed up in evidence, revealing her approval of expenses that had nothing to do with me. Her answers grew defensive, her charm brittle. By the end of the day, the polished image she had built for years looked paper-thin. When the judge recessed, I sat at the table with Julia, my hands still shaking. She leaned close and whispered, "You did exactly what you needed to. Whatever happens next, you've told your story. That has power." For the first time in a long time, I believed her. The verdict came on a gray morning in early spring. I sat at the long wooden table with Julia beside me, my palms pressed flat to stop them from trembling. Outside the courthouse window, the trees were just beginning to bud, fragile green against the cloudy sky. I focused on that detail as the judge entered, because looking at Vanessa across the aisle made my stomach tighten. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately, laying out the findings. Vanessa had used her role as trustee to divert funds for her children's education, luxury purchases, and business ventures. The paper trail was undeniable. Every transfer Julia had flagged lined up with my testimony. Then came the ruling: Vanessa was to be removed immediately as trustee. Control of the estate and trust would be transferred directly to me. In addition, full restitution was ordered, with criminal fraud charges recommended for review. The words washed over me, sharp and almost surreal. For years I had been bracing for the moment I'd lose everything my parents left behind. Instead, I was hearing that the future Vanessa had promised, me, penniless at 23, was gone. She had lost. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her face. The mask that had always looked so perfect was gone. Her mouth was tight, her eyes furious, her hands clenched on the table. Brandon and Chloe sat behind her, whispering in shock, no longer smug, no longer untouchable. For the first time, they looked like kids watching their world collapse. Julia placed a hand on mine and gave a small nod, steady and proud. She didn't need to say anything. I understood what that moment meant for both of us. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the air hit my face differently, lighter somehow, like the world had been holding its breath with me and was finally exhaling. Reporters gathered near the steps, throwing questions at Vanessa, who shielded her face as cameras flashed. No one asked me anything, and I was glad. This wasn't about headlines. It was about reclaiming something I thought I had lost forever. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the floor with a stack of papers Julia had handed me. Documents confirming my new control of the trust. I traced my name on the page, steady letters that felt like an anchor. For years, I had been told to wait, to depend, to stay small. Now, finally, the responsibility was mine, not because someone handed it to me, but because I fought for it. The months that followed were filled with adjustments. Vanessa's social circle turned cold once the charges became public. Invitations stopped, partnerships dissolved, her reputation cracked beyond repair. Brandon and Chloe left with her, retreating from the world that no longer applauded them. I didn't feel triumphant about their downfall, only relieved to see the distance growing. They no longer had a claim on my life. Julia became more than my lawyer. She stepped into a role I hadn't realized I needed, a guardian figure, mentor, and reminder of my mother's love. She helped me navigate the estate, taught me how to protect what was mine, and reminded me that strength didn't mean carrying everything alone. I finished my degree without the fear of funds running out, my tuition finally paid on time. For the first time, I allowed myself to plan beyond survival. In the quiet of those months, I thought often about my parents. My mother's warmth, my father's ambition, the life they had wanted for me. The grief would never disappear, but it no longer felt like a cage. It had become part of my foundation. By the time I turned 23, I wasn't just an heir. I was a survivor who had carved her own place in the world. I chose to honor that by creating something larger than myself, a foundation to support young people facing financial abuse from guardians or trustees. If even one person could find a way out of their silence because of it, then the years I spent trapped wouldn't be wasted. Looking back now, I see the long road clearly. The girl who once sat in a back bedroom surrounded by boxes marked books, Rachel, linens, Rachel, miscellaneous, Rachel, never imagined she would stand in court and win. But she did. And as I move forward, I carry my mother's laughter, my father's faith, and Julia's steady hand with me. Together, they gave me the strength to rise from betrayal into something greater, freedom, and the power to choose my own story.